Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel, and today I'm going to be counting down my top 10 favorite progressive metal albums of all time. Of course, everyone is going to have a differing of opinions here when it comes to the best progressive metal albums out there, but this is just my personal top 10, so with that in mind, let's get started with number 10. I'm going to go with Nothingface by Voivod, released in 1989. One of my favorite examples of how prog and thrash metal can be, joined together to create something really amazing and innovative for its time as well. Prior to the release of this record, Voivod were a pretty great and very underrated thrash metal act, but this record does mark the pinnacle of their creativity, in my opinion, expanding their sound in a more progressive direction, which you always love to hear. I do really enjoy the riffage here on this album, inspired by the orchestral piece Rite of Spring, so a great example of the vast array of influences that went into this record that really broadened their range, and in my opinion, really did show what Voivod could do on a larger scale to the best of their abilities, and that's a big factor as to why it's still to this day their most successful album, and my personal favorite from theirs as well. So coming in at number 10 here, I'm going to go with Nothingface by Voivod. Great combination of thrash and progressive metal. Following that up now with my number 9, we have Terria by Devin Townsend. Only one word could really describe this record, in my opinion, and that's epic. Devin Townsend was pretty unsatisfied with his previous album, that being Physicist from 2000, which he had described as, quote, a bunch of poo. That's his words. But he went back in the studio in 2000 to, write a more introspective record, mixing his trademark heaviness with some, melodic elements alongside pop and ambient influences. And what we got here is this masterpiece clocking in at a little over 70 minutes long. It's a record that takes a little bit of time to digest, I think, in my opinion, but ultimately is his best solo work. And a side note, I think Gene Hoglan absolutely kills it on the drums. Just an amazing record here, in my opinion, and one of those albums that, helped solidify Devin Townsend as one of the undisputed kings of prog. It's one of my favorite albums of all time. Coming in at number 8 here, let's go with Operation Mindcrime by Queensryche from 1988. Queensryche had really been building and building to this record, in my opinion, when you look at the evolution of their sound, maturing more and more and getting more comfortable over the years throughout the 80s until this record here. This is the peak of their creativity, and even though Empire would be their commercial peak, this is, in my opinion, their absolute best work. Jeff Tate's vocals are phenomenal. The concept is amazing. The lyrics are really cool. It tells a great story. Very gripping story as well. I remember the first time I heard this record, when it was done, I just kind of sat there like, what the heck did I just listen to? That was so awesome, and I still feel that way every time I listen to this record. Some standout tracks here for me include Revolution Calling, Operation Mindcrime, Spreading the Disease, Sweet Sister Mary, The Needle Lies, Breaking the Silence, I Don't Believe in Love is great, and then you have the iconic Eyes of a Stranger to close things out. Just essential progressive metal here, in my opinion. Really, it's essential metal in general. So with that in mind, my number 8 here on the list, going to be Operation Mindcrime by Queensryche. Following that up now with my number 7, we have From Mars to Sirius by Gojira. This is the band's third full-length studio effort, and arguably is their best work. This is an amazing and deep conceptual piece with an incredible flow to it, in my opinion. So it definitely does give off vibes of, say, Mastodon, Pantera, and Meshuggah, but Gojira were able to meld, technical death metal with groove metal and prog, with a great mix of extreme tracks as well as some more melodic, atmospheric-driven songs as well. So it is a very diverse effort, in my opinion, written mostly by Joe and Mario Di Plantier, and, it does convey a very wide range, but, for the range that it does, display here on this record, it has an amazing flow to it, which is something I look for in a great concept album. So I think every track kind of flows really nicely, and, I never got the impression from this record here that the ideas were scattered or out of place, despite, again, pretty wide range here of influences being melded into one for this album. But with that said, fantastic stuff here by Gojira. I'm going to go with From Mars to Sirius, coming in at number 7 here on the list. Of course, Symphony X had to be somewhere here on this list, so for my number 6, I'm going to go with the Divine Wings of Tragedy record. One of the key figures, of course, in the early years of progressive metal were Symphony X, and this album, released 12 years after their formation, is arguably their best studio effort. It is, in my opinion, at least. It's influenced by classical music mixed with the trademark Symphony X sound, and of course, on this album, you have Russell Allen's amazing lead vocals. Though some criticized them on this record for sounding too much like Ronnie James Dio, but I guess I missed the meeting where we decided that if you sound too much like Dio, that's automatically a bad thing. I don't understand that. I mean, if anything, being compared to Dio is anything but a bad thing, right? It's a total compliment. So, in my opinion, I think Russell Allen sounds fantastic here on this record, and this is an album that, is definitely, one of the best progressive records of the 90s, and definitely did help to solidify Symphony X as one of the premier progressive metal acts of that decade. So, with that in mind here, for number 6, I'm going to go with Divine Wings of Tragedy by progressive metal pioneers Symphony X. Top 5, let's go with Mastodon and Leviathan, released in 2004. based on Moby Dick. Leviathan is Mastodon's first concept record and was one of the first albums I thought of for this list. I thought, one of my favorite cliches in music is when a band pulls from classic literature or, anything of the sort for inspiration, and Mastodon do just that here on this record. That's nearly perfect in my opinion. It's a raging record, but it flows really well, which again, I love that quality in a concept album, and some of my favorite tracks from this album include Blood and Thunder, I Am Ahab, Sea Beast, Iron Tusk, and the 13-minute epic Hearts Alive. Number 4, Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory by Dream Theater. And in case you can't tell by now, I'm a total sucker for a great concept album, and Dream Theater provide that in spades here with my number 4 on the list. Influenced by other prog concept albums, Dream Theater showcase their next-level instrumentation here with the amazing riffs, right? Really towering stuff, featuring some of John Petrucci's best work on guitar. James LaBrie's vocals sound incredible, as strong as ever throughout. And in my opinion, it's an album that, definitely deserves the status that it has as being one of the staples of prog metal and one of the band's best studio records. So I definitely agree with both of those statements. I think it absolutely belongs near the top of any list when it comes to some great prog metal releases. So with that said, I had to put it in the top 5 here. Coming in at number 4, I'm going to go with Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory by Dream Theater. Number 3, I'm going to go with Still Life by Opeth. Now, this was a very difficult pick because I am limiting myself to only one per band. Probably should have said that at the start of the video here, but I'm limiting myself to one per band. That way, it's not dominated by one band. So that said, one from Opeth here, and obviously the one that comes to mind right away is Blackwater Park. However, I've just preferred Still Life just a little bit more to Blackwater Park, even though they're both fantastic records. It's a pretty dark album, but an amazing example of what happens when prog and death metal collide, in my opinion. The instrumentation on this record is amazing, first and foremost here, needless to say, of course, but what's crazy to me is to think that the band only had a chance to rehearse twice before going into the studio to record it, which is just insane. And some standout tracks as the end product would produce include the likes of The Moor, Moonlapse Vertigo, and the epic closer White Cluster, which features some really underrated dueling guitar solos, which don't get talked about nearly enough, but White Cluster, great album closer, fantastic record in general. To kick us off in the top 3 here, let's go with Still Life by Opeth. Again, one per band, so Blackwater Park, unfortunately not going to make this list. Sorry, not sorry, maybe sorry, but I just like Still Life a little bit more. My number 2 is a pick that I don't think too many people would be expecting, but if you follow my channel, you know this is my favorite Iron Maiden album of all time. I'm going to go with A Matter of Life and Death from 2006 by Maiden here. Now, this is, probably not the first album that comes to mind when you think of the best progressive metal album Maiden ever made, right? That would probably go to Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, which just happens to be my second favorite Iron Maiden album of all time. But what I love about A Matter of Life and Death, on top of the riffs and the lyrics and the vocals on here, is that it really does feel like a culmination of what they've been building up to at that point since the reunion. Brave New World was that reinvention of the classic Maiden sound with Adrian and Bruce back in the band, and Dance of Death was kind of an extension of that. And then on A Matter of Life and Death, you have the band going full throttle into this, more progressive side of them. Very heavy stuff, but also more drawn out, right? More dramatic, more complex. I really enjoy that about A Matter of Life and Death. I don't think there's a bad song on here. Different World, These Colors Don't Run, Brighter Than a Thousand Suns, The Longest Day, Out of the Shadows, Benjamin Brigg, For the Greater Good of God, Lord of Light. It's all fantastic. And then they toured this album in its entirety, which got a bad rap, unfortunately, but I know I personally would have loved to have seen that live. So incredible stuff here by Maiden. Maybe an unpopular choice for number 2, and I know it's unpopular to say this is my favorite Iron Maiden record, but it has developed kind of a cult following over the years since its release, and for me, it's just my personal favorite from Iron Maiden, and I wanted to include it here on this list. So with that in mind, my number 2 is going to be A Matter of Life and Death by Iron Maiden. Before I get to my number 1, I do have a handful of honorable mentions to give out. So honorable mentions here go out to Parallax 2, Future Sequence by Between the Buried and Me. We have Chaos Sphere by Mushiga, Awaken the Guardian by Fate's Warning, and The Sound of Perseverance by Death. All fantastic albums that will have a lot of great progressive metal elements to it, whether they're straight up prog or, implement elements of progressive metal with death metal or, anything like that, thrash. It's all fantastic stuff, but I can only fit 10 on the list here today. And finally, coming in at number 1 here on the list, let's go with Lateralus by Tool. This is, in my opinion, the best Tool studio album. The band outdo themselves here with a record that is very hard to digest at first. Trying to listen to this album in one piece for the first time is very difficult, but then in hindsight, I can't think of any other way to listen to it than to just listen to it from start to finish. That's how this album is meant to be enjoyed, but yeah, upon first listen, there's a lot to digest, a lot to take in. It's an album that really shows the complexity of Tool, right, with some great vocals and lyrics by Maynard James Keenan, but what really stands out is the drumming by Danny Carey on this record. His finest hour on the drums with Tool, in my opinion, just throughout this entire record from top to bottom. Everything, he does on this record turns to gold, and just in general, I love pretty much every aspect of this album. Don't think there's a bad song on here. There are definitely some that are better than others, but generally this is just Tool at their best, I think, firing on all cylinders in the studio. And like I've said a lot with Tool, they're synonymous with quality over quantity, so if it takes them a long time to make a studio album, it's because they're putting a lot of thought and time into a record, and I think this is a great example of that. Lateralus, incredible album from top to bottom here. A real thinking person's record, and again, a lot to consume at first, but ultimately over time became my favorite Tool record. And so with that in mind, my number one here on the list is going to be Lateralus by the Progressive Metal Kings, Tool. So that wraps up this list, counting down my top 10 favorite progressive metal albums of all time. It should be visible right over here. Sorry, by the way, for the poor lighting for this video. I've got my window right in front of me here, and it's been dark and cloudy all day, so not a lot of sunlight coming through, but nonetheless, I decided to make this video anyway because I really did want to get this one out there. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications so you never miss a new upload. Lots of exciting uploads coming to the channel toward the later part of this year, so you definitely don't want to miss it. Also, be sure to let me know down in the comments section below what are some of your favorite progressive metal albums of all time. I definitely want to hear from you. So let me know all that good stuff down in the comments. And until next time, it's the CD guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.